Hi there, everyone. My name is Tom Levine, Cornerstone's Tech Guru, but most of you have probably attended one or two webinars by now and probably already know me. We're going to go ahead and teach you a little bit of Excel today, which is actually my specialty. Excel's a really powerful program, and it can be used in a wide variety of applications. Today, we're going to be using the newer version, Microsoft Excel 2019, but if you use Office 365, or if you use an older version of Excel, that should be fine as well. So just a few notes before we get started. First off, general housekeeping. If you have a question, please feel free to type it into the question box and I will get to it closer to the end of the presentation. I do see those as you type them in though, so if I think something's relevant to what we're doing, I'll go ahead and comment on it then. Also, don't forget that you can reach out to me directly as well. You can contact me at 513-487-5390 or by email at tlevine@crnstone.com. So if you have a question that you don't feel comfortable asking in the general presentation, please feel free to go ahead and ask me directly. Also, we have our cash incentive program back this year. You can earn up to $7,000 with this. We have a bunch of prizes as displayed on the screen, and it's for all group and individual new business sales between January 1st and December 31st of this year, 2021. You'll earn points that bring you closer to the $7,000 cash prize. The top 15 qualifiers will also earn cash with qualifiers starting at 2,000 points. So that's the minimum threshold you'd have to hit. New sales only, and you must be registered to qualify. You can register online at www.crnstone.com/cash-incentive-program. And that is displayed at the top of the screen right up here. Also, don't forget about our marketing consultation program. If you like our marketing materials and like the look of this PowerPoint even, then maybe this is for you. It's designed to help you reevaluate your brand and help you take it to the next level. The available services are a brand audit, a website creation, even social media management, and a brand identity kit. There's even more though. And brokers who are part of our marketing consultation service program will also receive access to the Evaluating Your Brand workbook. Services are first come, first served, and we only have a limited amount of people that we can take on for this type of offer. But if you're interested, please contact our Jess Larkin, jlarkin@crnstone.com for more information. So without further ado, Excel. Excel is a really powerful program, and like I said before, we're using the 2019 version. So your view of Excel might look a bit different. If you would like to follow along as I start diving into this, please take a look at the handout section of this webinar. You should see the Excel sample workbook.xls file there. And what that is just an exact copy of what I have on file right here. It will allow you to sort of follow along as we make changes to this document. I don't think it'll be as necessary for this webinar, but in the next webinar, it's going to be really helpful as well to have it. So let's go ahead and get a lay of the land. I think that's probably the easiest way to get used to understanding how Excel's sort of laid out. The first thing I want to point out are that there are multiple tabs down here at the bottom, and each of these tabs correspond to different sheets. As you can see, I have a reference file up here first, displaying the very large disclaimer that says all names, dates, phone numbers, policy numbers, payment rates, and displays have been randomly generated and are not real. Any likeness or similarity to any real-life person or real-life carrier are just, coincidental. None of these rates, none of these numbers, none of these people should exist in real life, and if they do, then it's all coincidence. I have to say that, our legal department told me to. Anyway, we also have general formula and syntax notes here on this first tab. These also include samples for formulas and nesting, which we will get to in our second presentation, along with different logical operators used and just generally good information for general purpose functions. Additionally, we have this reference file, which we will be using as we dig through and start making our charts and data look a little more presentable. And we have a working file, which is where we'll be spending most of our time. This is the file that we will be editing most often. I also have a fourth called sample pivot, but that's not created yet. And if you would like to fully round out your workbook and follow along, that will be the last thing we make in our 201 webinar. Either way, let's get a lay of the land with the top menu here. Natively, when you open up Excel, typically you have, in 2019 at least, a green window that tells you to select either a blank workbook or some other thing. If you select a blank workbook, it should open you into a view like this that says Sheet 1 and have all of these menu items promptly displayed. The home menu is pretty much where you're going to be spending a lot of your time in Excel. The home menu sort of jumps through a bunch of the generally more frequently accessed functions of Excel. If you watched our Outlook webinar as well, you might feel that this looks somewhat familiar, and it should. Almost all Office applications have this top menu set up to be fairly similar, with the Home tab being sort of a general purpose menu with a lot of different options on it. I'm going to go ahead and start circling these as I go through the different options, but the first section up here is your clipboard. This section I tend to ignore, mostly because a lot of the functions that you can get through it can be accessed with keyboard shortcuts. This lets you cut with the scissors different areas of data you have selected, or copy and change different copy types using this menu. And then you can also paste data using this little clipboard over here, or clear your data using that little duster, I guess I'd call it. And here we'll erase all drawings, and I'll just click through it for you real quick. You have to have a range selected. A range is just a array of cells in order to get any of these physical buttons to work. But the same things can be accomplished with Control Copy, Control Paste as the cut button, and then paste using right click or paste using the clipboard. And then, as I said, this is the format painter, or duster as I called it. This one actually allows you to format different sections that have been fully selected with your range. Like I said, I don't normally use it. There are better menu options that you can use. Then we have our font options. Font options can be used to change the content of a cell, like what I just clicked on. That changed all of these names to red lettering. I can change it back by selecting black. I could also fill it with color, like orange, if I so choose, using this fill icon right here. Or I could just set it to no fill, which is no color. There is a difference between no fill and white. As you can see, none of the borders are filled in anymore, and that's because I selected the white background from this paint menu. You can also change the border settings of a cell. Through this dropdown, you have access to a bottom, top, left, and right border, as well as full borders, and just the outside, thick outside borders, all different menu options. If you don't like the options that you see, you can get more specific by clicking More Borders, and then you gain access to all of the different line styles and all of the different types of borders that you can select. I'd recommend just fiddling around with these on your own time to create sort of a border display that you enjoy. Additionally, you can underline text, italicize, and bold it, as well as change the font, text size, and quickly up or lower your text size using these two menu options. You can also, similar to word commands, change how that data is displayed using these alignment tools. You can't quite see it, so let me extend these cells a bit. But I'm changing right here the level of where the text is in the cell, and then I'm changing the alignment of the text as well. I think that center left typically looks the best. Either way, you can also add indents. You can tell your text to rotate vertically or diagonally to narrow columns. I don't think it's very useful, but some people enjoy it. And you can even add wrap text. Wrap text is generally what you see when, here, let me do this. See how these names are all cut off. If I highlight column E and tell it to wrap text, suddenly all of those columns now have extended all the way to the bottom, and the text wraps around to the next line and automatically extends the size of these cells. If I turn it off, everything goes back to normal size. So this can really help you as far as formatting the overall look of a final table that you're trying to show. Additionally, there are formats in Excel, and this is what tends to cause the most number of headaches. A format is just sort of the type of information you're entering into Excel. And Excel tries its best to guess what format you're trying to enter in. This can be really problematic, especially if you're trying to enter dates or just strings of numbers that begin with like 0. There is general, number format, currency, accounting, different date formats, time formats, percentages, fractions, scientific notation, and general text. If you're trying to enter a large number with a bunch of zeros in the front, text is likely your best bet for formatting. However, Excel will likely pick up that it's a number and try to tell you to change it. That's what the little green arrows, it'll likely pop up here in a minute. Yep, that one is trying to tell me. If I click on the little cell, I get this notice here. If I click on the dropdown, it'll say it's a number stored as text. If I convert to number, that changes it directly back to the general format and tells me that this is a number and loses the bleeding zeros. I'm going to just Control Z to undo this and get my data back to the way it was. Additionally, you can apply conditional formatting, although I wouldn't recommend getting into this unless you know kind of what you're doing with it. This is how you get lists of things that change color automatically. Previously, when we were hunting for missing policies and missing payments, I would set up conditional formatting in my spreadsheets to say, oh, there's a blank cell, that means you're missing payment, and it would auto color it there. If you're curious about how to do that, it's a more advanced feature. Please send me an email and I might include it in our 201 webinar. You can also format full ranges of data as tables, which we will do at the end of this presentation using this dropdown, and change cell styles here as well. I don't mess around with cell styles that often, but it's a pretty good way to get your tables looking a little more professional. You can also insert cells using this menu here. I personally don't enjoy interacting with the menu to do that. I like to just right click, like right here on a cell, and then say like insert. And that will tell me how I can shift cells around. I could shift the cells down, which moves my data down one row, or I can shift to the right or left when I say insert, or up. So shift cells right, that moves all of the data on that row to the right. If I then right click and change the shift, so insert, I can insert then an entire row maybe, or if I wanted to, a whole new column. I think that's just a little bit easier than interacting with these insert commands up here in the menu, at least personally. It's all about your personal preference. The other thing you can do is apply your formatting manually using this format button here, or delete cells using the delete cell option here. You can delete cells, rows, columns, and sheets. Although I will say you can delete sheets as well just by right-clicking on them and hitting delete. And if I Control Z, it will not bring your sheet back. You can also gain access to the general information editing tab over here. this is very useful for formulas, so we'll be coming back to this button up here, but this automatically sums ranges. And this, if I click on the dropdown, automatically brings me to a bunch of different other functions that I could use. More functions is where we'll be going here in a moment. It can also fill data. So if Excel detects a pattern, you like these numbers here, I'm just going to go ahead and delete the numbers real quick to show you. If I highlight the range 1, 2, and 3 and hit fill down, it fills the top cell down. I personally prefer to just double click things. If you highlight your cell in the corner here and Excel detects a pattern, it'll give you this little quick analysis button here. And you can just double click the bottom right hand corner and it'll extend your pattern all the way down the cell range. You can also find and select. Find is pretty useful. For instance, let's find the number 34. And it'll jump me to number 34. One trick about the find and replace in Excel is, let's say we're trying to find Melina in this document. So just to show you, I'll type out Melina. See how we got this error? It says Excel couldn't find what I was looking for. That's because I only have column A selected. If I extend my data to the full workbook, which I did just by clicking up here in the right-hand corner and hit Find Next, it'll jump me to every instance of Melina in this sheet. So if you're trying to find, a string in a specific row, or a name, I guess I'd say, then you're going to have to highlight that row specifically and then search. Additionally, we have the Insert tab. There's not much in here that I think would be useful for this specific webinar, but this is how you would insert a pivot table, which we'll once again cover in 201. There's also a page layout section, which allows you to insert page breaks, change the background of your full spreadsheet, and add a little bit of personality to it. You can also get print tiles, which is where you would like rows and columns to repeat using this option up here. You can also gain access to quickly choosing themes for your tables, along with object controls. So if you have like a logo, for example, you can choose to move it behind the data that's being displayed using these sections here. Then there's the formula sort of section. We'll get to this more in detail in a moment, but the formula tab allows you to insert different functions, and you can choose different things that you want it to do automatically. The functions are probably the most powerful part of Excel, and they're what I like to use a lot. Functions are also called formulas, and formulas can be a little bit complex sometimes. But we'll be going through some of these here in a moment. You also gain access to these functions categorized. For instance, all of our financial functions are under the Financial tab, logical functions under the Logical tab, text functions are under the Text tab, and so on and so forth. If you want just math, you can even get all these math equations that will process automatically. There's also a name manager here, which we'll probably not be covering, but you can select ranges of cells and give them names to make things easier to reference. They also allow you to get in depth with error checking for your formulas, but this is more of an advanced feature. Then you have the Data tab. Excel's giving me a few notes here because this is the first time I fired it up on this computer, but the Data tab allows you to freely manipulate your data sets. For instance, it can pull data from a table or a range here. It will also allow you to import from a database if you use a SQL Server or Microsoft Access. This get data function allows you to easily import data from that. It also pulls data from text and CSV files. CSV is comma separated value, and I'm sure if you use Excel every day, you've seen one or two sheets that are similar to this. It also lets you refresh data on automatically generated tables like pivot tables. And it also allows you to edit column text, which we're going to be doing here in a moment. This text to column feature is incredibly useful. And just to show it off a little bit, I'm going to insert a column between D and E. And I'm going to go ahead and select all of the names that I have listed over here in column D. Then I'm going to hit text column. What text to column does is it takes a string and it will split it up. I can do it on a fixed width, which means I just click where I want the cells to split, hit next. Then I can change the format. For instance, I know this is text, so I've selected this column that's in black, and I've hit text. Then I can select the next column that'll be created, and I can also change it to text. Or using this dropdown, I could change it to specific date formats, or I could choose to not import a column or skip it. And then I'll click Finish. And what that did was where I put that line on my sample data, it split all of these cells based on where I put the line. For instance, I have FOX, comma, space J. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters. If I look at atoms, comma, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters. So that's all that specific text splitting does. But the real power of it is that you can actually use it in a delimited way. Delimited allows you to split data up based on characters. So for instance, commas in a last name, first name order. All I've done is I've clicked comma, but you could also choose to split up cells based on other criteria. I like to use a separator, which is just a straight up and down line, to separate all of my data. So if I'm trying to split up names or other things, I tend to just hit other and use the separator. But I could also use something like the character J or a capital J. And as you can see, that started to show that it's separating everything with tabs, commas, and now the letter J. It does delete the character that it's using to split information, so that's something to keep in mind as you use this delimited method. If I hit finish here, then there we have it. I have Adams John, Adams Dan, Adams Craig, and they were all split on the comma. So that wasn't just based off of how many characters I selected. If I hit Control Z twice, I can then undo the changes that I've made. The other tabs here are really more useful for just changing views and for editing and protecting worksheets. This review tab allows you to password protect worksheets from changes from other people, along with locking the entire workbook. If I hit protect workbook, then I can name a password such as password or just pass, capital P, and hit OK. It prompts me to re-enter the password. And now when I save this workbook and close it, and then go to reopen it, which is what I'm doing now, it prompts me for a password. Here we go. If I double click to open it, it starts loading. And it should have prompted for the workbook protection. Ah, I see. Okay, so what that did was it should have locked all of the editing on this workbook, but it's not as useful as we see. I'm going to unprotect it now. It's kind of hard to show when you're the one who's locking it. The other option is to go to File, and under the Save information here, for Protect Workbook, we can encrypt with password. That should do it this time. Okay, now a password is required to open the workbook, and I'm going to save Then I'm going to go to reopen this. And as we can see, it prompts me for a password. I re-enter the password, and now I can access the workbook. If I go and wanted to remove this, then I can just, change that here. Instead of encrypt with password, I can choose to decrypt it by simply selecting to encrypt it again and removing the password. And then I'm going to save. All right, outside of that, we have the View tab. And View gives you a lot of different ways to look at a spreadsheet, but I think the most useful thing on this tab is freeze panes. It lets you do things like freezing the top row, which on this worksheet is this disclaimer. And now as I scroll through, I've frozen that top column, like so. If I wanted to undo that, I just click on the freeze pane section again and hit unfreeze panes. You can also do that to columns as well as specific ranges of data. So if I wanted to, I could freeze the top two columns and this row, and then as I scroll through, it would just scroll my data. I think it's pretty useful, especially in larger spreadsheets like this one. But that basically takes you through most of the full menu that you would normally use. So without further ado, I'm going to get into some of the functions, which are probably why you're here. Functions are pretty dang useful, and what they are used to do is accomplish complex tasks that might take you a very long time to do manually. A good example of a function is the concatenate function, which I'm going to show you first. It's one of the simpler functions, and it lets me show you a few different things about formulas in general. I will say I like to type my formulas manually, which I accomplish by selecting a cell, selecting this little header up here, and then hitting equals, and then typing the name of a function. In this case, I'm going to do concatenate. Concatenate is what you'll use in older versions, which is why I'm using it, but they've made it a little bit easier. They have a new concatenate function called concat, which you're likely going to be using if you're using Microsoft Office 365 or anything, more recent, like Excel 2018, I think had it. Either way, concat or concatenate do the same thing. The way I did that was I just hit equals, type concatenate, and hit an open parenthesis. This gives me a few different options, and these sections that are separated by commas are called arguments. The arguments for a function are its inputs. So these are the things that Excel just uses to run the function. For concatenate, it's trying to put text strings together. So I want to concatenate, let's say, Adams and John in the format that's listed above here. So the way I could do that is I could just type Adams, comma, John, and in my parenthesis, I'll hit enter. But as you can see, that doesn't quite work. The reason that doesn't work is because Excel is looking for inputs to a function, not just strings of text. I could make this string of text readable as an input, though. The way you do that is by surrounding whatever you're trying to input in quotations. Now, as you can see, it joined the phrase Adams with the phrase John directly. But that still doesn't do what we really wanted it to do. We wanted Adams, comma, space, John. So we need to add a third input. I want it to read the text string, comma, space, in between these two names. So now we have Adams, comma, space, John. And if I hit enter, that's what's displayed. Now that was all a very manual process. However, there's a way to make it easier. For instance, if I go into this little drop down here, I can then click More Functions. This is on the home screen, and this is that Auto Sum button that I showed you earlier. If I hit More Functions, we gain access to the Insert Function Wizard menu. And what that does is it lets you search for all of the functions that Excel has, and then you can select one and open it. For instance, let's use Concatenate, which we just tried to do. I type Concatenate and hit Enter on my keyboard, which is the same as pressing this Go button. And that brings me up a bunch of different functions that operate within the Concatenate parameter. For instance, it pulled up the concatenate in this word of this description of this concat function. It also brought me the count if, because CO is the first two letters, and so on and so forth. It also has join text, which concatenates a list of strings using a delimiter. It's a little more advanced. I wouldn't recommend using it, along with the data count, which counts things in databases. So let's select the concatenate function. I do that just by clicking it, and then I can hit OK to move to the next screen, or I can double click. That brings me to a menu like this. All of those commas for inputs that I mentioned earlier are these text arguments here that are listed. For instance, I could type John, comma, space, and then Adams. And it starts adding those quotation marks in for me that I did previously. The thing I want to point out is this right up here. This is the formula bar. This is the actual function that we're putting into the cell, and it's displayed in the exact same way that I would have typed it out myself. If I wanted it to be the exact same thing that I typed, I can do John, and then in this box just put a comma, and then in this box put Adams. So I will want to go back and add the space. Then I hit OK, and I get John, comma, Adams. Now, I've been doing all of this with solid text just to sort of explain and more visually show you what this concatenate function does. But that's not where the power of this lies. I'm going to undo that. And let's just click and drag this cell from the bottom corner. If I let go, as you can see, it's just populating John Adams, John Adams, John Adams, because that's all we had listed here. The real power of these functions is that they can use cells as their variables. So cells can be the input for these functions. If I go back into the menu for the wizard and use concatenate again, this time, let's just click on cells. For instance, I want B2. And then in my next input, I want C2. And then I hit OK. Now you can see I've got Adams John as one solid word, but if I drag this formula down, it pushes both of those together into one string based on what's in the cells that I gave it. And this is sort of what makes functions more usable. All of the math functions that you'll be using all reference cells, not solid numbers. So that's why you can change the contents of a cell and have the function that you're outputting be fine. And it'll just sum everything, or depending on what function you're using. So let's go back and actually combine these two methods. So that way we get this name populated exactly the way we need it. If I go to sort and filter, or not sort and filter, I'm sorry. If I go to the more functions section and select concatenate again, let's do Adams for B2. Then my second input, I want to be comma space. And then for my third input, I'm going to select John and hit enter. That gives me Adams, comma space John. And if I extend that all the way down my formula cell, I get this concatenated name here. Concatenate is a very useful function as well if you're trying to split up policy numbers. I know a lot of statements, I believe Allied National, a lot of times on the emeritus statements as well, they have like a front number a dash, and then a back number. And while those are useful, they tend to come in separate columns. I like to log all of the numbers in a policy number together when I'm trying to track information in my database. So I use the concatenate function all the time to push together the two policy numbers into a string of text, and that way I have every bit of information whenever I'm inputting policy information. Another useful function that you could use is VLOOKUP. We'll be explaining this with that formula menu, but like the others, we have to type, or we can type this formula as well. For me, I think that once you get used to formulas, typing them is quicker and easier, and it also lets you understand exactly what you're doing with them. So that's why I type them. But for now, we're going to use the wizard. If I go into More Functions and type VLOOK and hit Go, or let's just type the full name, which is VLOOKUP, and hit Go. Then it gives us this function, VLOOKUP. As the wizard states, it says VLOOKUP has 4 inputs, and it looks for a value in the leftmost column of a table, then returns the value in the same row for a column you specify. By default, the table must be sorted in ascending order. This is very useful information, but it doesn't do a great job of explaining what the function does. All of these functions that I click sort of give me a little blurb down here to sort of show what they're supposed to do. So just to demonstrate VLOOKUP, we're going to be filling in this relationship column in our working file based off of the reference file information that we had. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to double click on VLOOKUP and explain the prompts as I go through them. The first is a lookup value. This tells it what to match data against. And in this example, we're going to want to use the lines. So I'm going to select cell A2 as my lookup value for cell E2. Then we have a table array. What a table array is sort of the reference data. It's what this VLOOKUP is going to try to reference. If I go to this reference file tab, I did that just by clicking on the reference file, and then I highlight columns A to D and let go. Then I get my input of reference file A to D. Another thing that I could do is manually select the entire range of this data, which is what I'm going to do now just to illustrate a point that we'll be getting to here in a moment. Then it asks you for a column index number. What this means is what column of the base table array we're looking at do we want it to export? Now, we referenced column A to D in this table array. So let's just go ahead and choose column 3, just as an input for now. And then the last option here is a range lookup. This isn't a very descriptive name, and what it's really telling you is how close of a match do we need in order to spit out data. I always type in false, and I'd highly encourage you to always type in false as well. If you type in true, it'll look for near information. So like, let's say we were looking up 1. If it, say, matched to an 11 first, that's 2 ones, and it would export the data in column 11. If we use false, however, it will always just look for 1 and exclusively 1. So I'm going to hit OK here. And as you can see, we got an output. Our output of this is John. What I want to bring to your attention are these parts of the formula right up here. In our table, that was input 2 and input 3, which if I go back in to the formula editor, and I did that by selecting the cell and hitting the drop down and then more functions, that brought me to the function wizard for the function that was already in that cell. As you can see, it's referencing over here, reference file 82 to D602. that means that it's referencing here to column D and down. Column index number 3 means that if this first far left column that I selected is column 1, it's outputting column 2, column 3, which is this number here. So it's looking for matches based on whatever is in cell A2 in our working file, which is 1 in this case. It looks through the reference file and says, oh, 1, okay. What column am I looking for? Column 3. So it counts over to column 3 and gives us John. Now I'm going to reset this one right here by clearing out the data and hitting A2, and then hit OK, and we get back to it. Now, what would I do if I'm trying to populate this relationship field? Well, on our reference file, relationship is column E, so I would need to extend my reference out a little further. Then I would also need to change this column number as well. So just to show you that, I'm going to put E here instead of the D in the reference file. And as you can see, it's still giving us John. Then if I change this column index number that it's trying to reference, and it's even giving us these inputs down here, just to sort of show where we are in the function, and I change that to 5, then I get the relationship. Now, what I want you to look at as I do this next step is to look at what happens to this range here as I drag and drop, along with this range here. And I'm going to delete the working file reference there. As I drag this formula down, we're still getting matches. But look at the numbers as I scroll down. Because I dragged this formula down, it also changed the reference that I'm using. So now, in this table, it's referencing reference file A11 to E611. And to show you what that means a little more visually, I'm going to go to More Functions and click on Reference File. And what that does is it jumps me to the start of where we're referencing. And as you can see, we start down here at A11. That's fine for this case, because as our cell reference is moving, we're changing what it's looking up, and our numbers match exactly. However, that's not always what we want. If I go back to my working file and cancel the changes, I can set it up so that it doesn't actually change this table reference. This is where syntax comes into play. Syntax is over here in this logical operator section, and I sort of give you a description through here of all the different syntax options. For now that we're just getting started, all you really need to know about are dollar signs. Dollar signs prevent data from being changed. If I wanted to say, always keep cell A2 as my top left reference, I put a dollar sign in front of the 2, and now as I drag and drop numbers, that 2 won't change. Look at the 602 right here versus the 2 that I just put the dollar sign in front of as I drag this formula back down. As I scroll through the formulas, as you can see, the number that I didn't put the dollar sign in front of is increasing as I drag things down. This is also useful because if I drag a formula to the right or left, it also changes the columns that I'm referencing. As you can see, what was once A is now B, and what was once E is now F. To prevent this type of move, you need to put dollar signs in front of those as well. So the correct way to use this VLOOKUP is to put dollar signs in front of A2 and E602, which is not something that Excel automatically does if you're using the VLOOKUP wizard within the same worksheet. If I then extend this formula all the way down, you can see all that's changing is that reference cell that we gave it initially. I know this one's a little bit more complex than some of the other functions that we're going to use here in a minute, but I think it's a pretty useful tool to explain sort of how these functions work. The next function that I wanted to show you, and probably one of the last ones because I'm taking a lot of time with this and walking you through everything, are the round function and the sum function. These two functions are probably what you're going to use most frequently. What round does is it rounds off a number, and what sum does is it adds two numbers together. If I extend column P, you can see that on our working file, I have something called corrected total paid. I also have a column over here that just says total paid, and this matches my reference file numbers as well. The thing I want to point out is that all of these cells have numbers formatted so that they only show 2 digits. But when I click on a cell, like cell O2, you can see that it's not actually $4.50. It's $4.50 and 1/10 of a cent. So that's not really a full round whole number. If I scroll down through, you can even see that what looks like 1 whole penny is actually, half a penny. This 103 is actually 103.25. So none of these values are actually really whole numbers. There are a bunch of numbers that are just showing up as though they're, 2 numbers and getting automatically rounded. The problem with this is that if I highlight the entire range of these cells, it adds up to $1,688.54. However, that's not quite what you would do if you were just adding all of these regularly. It's not the same value that you'd get if you were actually just adding these numbers. Look here. If I add these three, I get 450 plus 1 penny plus 103. And the sum tells me it's 5.54. If I type in 4.5, 0.01, and 1.03, and highlight this, I get 554. Over here, I get 554. But I know that's not quite right. And if I extend this out, you can see that number and sum change. It's fine if you're just, lining up data like this, but if you actually do a sum equation on it, it should be different. In this cell here, just for a sample, please don't follow along as I do this, I'm going to type a formula. It's equals sum. You can do the same thing if you are using the formula box by clicking more functions and finding sum. That'll give you these inputs, and you're just going to input the cells that I'm going to select. We're going to start by summing column O 2 to 4 in this box. Then we'll also sum these corrected values, and it's fine. But that's because these are input as numbers. I'm going to change them to general format. And then I'm going to retype this formula here. Gives me the same value, but as I extend it out, it's really not 554, unlike this solid value, which is 554. So how do we compensate for things like this? What we would do is we would use the round function. If I do equals round, or better yet, I would use the formula round. And then I select the number or the input cell, and then just say I only want 2 digits. Hit OK, and there we have it. The value is 450. If I highlight these, copy and paste value, then I actually get those solid values in those cells. I'm going to go ahead and populate that down the entire column as well. So it'll be equals round cell value comma, 2, if you're typing out your formula. And then I'm going to double click on the corner to populate that formula all the way down the line. Then I just copy, paste values, and now I have a fully correct total column. And I'm going to extend out my numbers here just so it's more evident. I'm also going to save this file, and this is where we're going to go ahead and end the session for today. I know that was a lot of information, and one of the first questions that I got was, will this be recorded and sent for future use? We actually do have all of our webinars recorded, and real quick, I'll show you where you can find them. If you go online to www.crnstone.com, then you get to our main website. And all I did was open up an internet browser and type in www.crnstone.com to get here. Then, under our Resource Center, Webinar Series, and Tech Tuesday, which is right down here in our webinar series, you can access all of our recordings from this year and last year. I know this was pretty quick, and we covered a lot of different things about Excel, so you might not have been able to keep up all the way through. This was meant to be sort of a crash course, and we covered a lot of things. So if you'd like to review, all of our webinars will be uploaded here. We should have this one uploaded in full by Friday. So you'll be able to follow along that way. You can also download this workbook now. I'm going to keep the session open for a little bit so everyone has a chance to download the worksheet, but also you could follow along as I make changes on that. The other thing you could do is you could send me an email after this is fully recorded, and you can gain access to this workbook because I'll just send it your way. Once again, I'm going to put my contact information up at the top of the screen. So from current slide, here we are. You can give me a ring at 513-487-5390, or you could send me an email at tlevine@crnstone.com. My apologies about that. Let me put that slide back up again. There we go. So yes, Heather, you will have access to all of this, and I know it was a lot of information, but hopefully you'll be able to look through, and please feel free to ask me if you had any questions. Thank you very much. And I'll be online for a few moments longer.